Welcome to Module 7, the Scorecards. In this module, we will learn what the scorecards are and how they were created. We will understand the scorecard approval process. We will learn how to complete Scorecard A, and we will learn how to complete Scorecard B. Scorecards, an introduction. The goal of the Virginia Pollinator-Smart program is to create self-sustaining and high-quality pollinator landscapes that require minimal maintenance in the long term. The scorecards are a standardized way to evaluate sites in the context of this goal. Using habitat assessments to evaluate the relative ecological health of a site is a key concept in the natural resources field. The concept of using a metric-based system for this approach extends at least as far back as the 80s. Scorecards designed to evaluate pollinator habitat at solar facilities are used across the United States and at least 15 other states. In order to align ourselves with the other state programs, we decided to follow suit with a scorecard approach. We held stakeholder meetings in 2018 and 2019 that greatly informed the direction of the Virginia Pollinator-Smart Solar Program, and these meetings especially influenced the scorecards. The scorecards are designed with flexibility in mind. The program intends to accommodate all types of facilities across all regions of the state. Ultimately, two versions of the scorecard were created. Version A, the proposed or retrofit scorecard, sets the site's baseline and is the first scorecard submitted as a part of the program. Version B, the established site scorecard, evaluates the effectiveness of the pollinator habitat once it is implemented. There are two levels of certification associated with the program. There's the Certified Virginia Pollinator-Smart level, which is between 80 and 99 points, and there's the Gold Certified Virginia Pollinator-Smart level, which is 100 plus points. Available online in Appendix A of the Comprehensive Manual is the Scorecard User's Guide, which explains all facets of the scorecards, including timelines, requirements, the review processes, and how to assess each question. Scorecard approval process. In order to be certified as Pollinator-Smart, a site must implement Pollinator-Smart practices over at least 10% of the project area, and pass the points threshold designated on the scorecard. The Virginia Pollinator-Smart Solar Program is 10 years long, which is in line with similar types of restoration programs in the state. Submittals for recertification are required every 2 years after the initial certification, which we call year 0 in this diagram. This timeline details the recommended timing of submittal and the scorecard to be used for recertification. In the initial year, consider submitting the scorecard and associated materials as early in the planning process as possible. This will allow the review board time to address any potential issues they may see with the proposal. At a minimum, submit the Version A proposed and retrofit solar site scorecard at least a month in advance of the intended seeding date. In years 2, 4, 6, and 8, submit the established site scorecard between September and December. Vegetation monitoring will need to be conducted to complete the scorecard, and that monitoring should be conducted in mid to late summer. Therefore, the scorecard would follow after the results of the fieldwork are processed. In the final year of the program, year 10, the established solar site scorecard and a long-term vegetation management plan should be submitted between September and December. As long as the site is recertified and the long-term vegetation management plan is accepted, the site will be considered Pollinator-Smart for the life of the project. Once scorecards are completed, they should be submitted to the pollinator.smart@dcr.virginia.gov email address. The Pollinator-Smart Review Board will review your application. The board consists of members from the Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Department of Wildlife Resources, and the College of William and Mary. They will notify you when the application is considered complete. At that point, the board will review your application within 21 days. If you don't receive any correspondence after 21 days and the site passed the scorecard, it can be considered certified. How to complete the scorecard, page 1. When the scorecards are printed, they come out on the front and the back of one sheet. So we call this the front page. On this sheet, you will see a brief description of the Pollinator-Smart program, definitions, a link to resources that may be valuable to you, and instructions on how to complete the scorecard. You will also need to complete the project details portion of the page. This includes the date, the site owner or designee, the project address, which can be in GPS coordinates if that's easier, the project size in acres and megawatts, and also consider providing the total size of the Pollinator-Smart portion of the site if it's different than the entire site, and also a point of contact so that the review board can contact this person with comments and approvals. You should also provide the name of your vegetation consultant if known. If not yet known, write undetermined. The name of your seed supplier is provided on the proposed/retrofit solar site scorecard only. If you know who your supplier is, please provide their name. If not yet known, write undetermined. And finally, please include your target seeding date. This is, again, for the proposed and retrofit solar site scorecard only. Dates are subject to change with changing construction timelines. Contact the pollinator.smart@dcr.virginia.gov email address if the date changes 6 or more months or it moves into a different calendar year, as this could impact the overall timeline of the recertification process. Several attachments are required to be submitted alongside your completed scorecard. They are detailed in this table here. A planting plan and seed mix and seeding rates are required during your initial planting year, year 0. Additionally, a project vicinity map, vegetation monitoring plan, and site photos are required in all certification years. Optional attachments include the vegetation management plan, invasive species mapping, and research and collaboration documentation. These only need to be submitted if you select these options in questions 7 and 9. Additionally, a vegetation monitoring report is required for years 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. And finally, in year 10, it's strongly recommended that you submit a long-term management plan. If it's provided alongside the scorecard in year 10 and it's improved, your site can be considered Pollinator-Smart for the life of the project. How to complete Scorecard A. Scorecard A is split into roughly 2 categories, vegetation and site management metrics. The vegetation questions will require you to know which seed mixes will be used on site before beginning. Additionally, these questions rely heavily on the Virginia Solar Site Native Plant Finder, so we recommend that you review that module before beginning. The Site Management Metrics session will require at least one site visit before completing in most cases. Since this is the proposed scorecard, that can be conducted during the site suitability analysis. In order to simplify completing the scorecard, there are optional worksheets provided in Appendix A of the Comprehensive Manual that can help you prepare to answer your questions. These sheets are available for the panel zone, the open area, and the screening zone. I'm about to go through each question on Scorecard A. Because of this, I suggest that you have the scorecard in front of you during this section of the module. You may also want to have the Virginia Solar Site Native Plant Finder open, since it determines which species are native. I will provide some background into why the question is being asked, and then I will explain how to evaluate each question. The first section of the scorecard deals with vegetation metrics associated with the panel zone. Question 1 reads, percent of panel zone to be planted with a seed mix of native species developed using the Solar Site Native Plant Finder. A seed mix counts towards this question if the top 3 dominant species in the seed mix and the majority of the species within the seed mix can be found on the Solar Site Native Plant Finder. Although not ideal, not every seed mix will contain only native species, especially in situations where there are site constraints that may prevent this from happening. If your seed mix has a mix of native and non-native species, as long as it meets the above requirement, then it can still be counted fully towards this question. Simply divide the acreage to be planted by the total acreage of the panel zone and multiply by 100 to get your answer. Question 2 reads, planned native grass diversity in the panel zone. This question encourages functional diversity by asking you to focus on not just the flowering species that benefit pollinators, but also the grasses that can provide habitat for those species. The Virginia Solar Site Native Plant Finder indicates which species are grasses under the plant type field. Add the number of native grasses together in the seed mix to get your answer. The second section of the scorecard deals with vegetation metrics in the open area. Question 3 reads, the percent of open area to be planted with Virginia Pollinator-Smart seed mix developed using the Solar Site Native Plant Finder. You may notice this is worded a little differently than question 1, which was located in the panel zone. That's because the open area typically has fewer site constraints, and because of that, we want to really encourage you to take advantage of this area as much as possible to produce high-quality pollinator habitat. A Virginia Pollinator-Smart seed mix has different requirements than what was outlined in question 1. This type of seed mix has 20 or more native species overall, 3 or more species of native grasses, and at least 3 flowering native species in each season. Use the Virginia Solar Site Native Plant Finder to determine the status of each species. As long as you're using a Virginia Pollinator-Smart seed mix in the open area, you can divide the acreage of the open area to be planted by the total acreage of the open area and multiply it by 100 to get your answer. Question 4 reads, total number of solar site native plant finder species in the seed mix to be used within the open area. If you're using a Virginia Pollinator-Smart seed mix, you automatically qualify for maximum points on this question. If you're not using a Pollinator-Smart seed mix, then you have the chance to sum the number of native species in the mix to get your answer. Question 5 states, for the seed mix to be used within the open area, seasons with at least 3 solar native plant finder species in flower. This is a check all that apply question. If you're using a Virginia Pollinator-Smart seed mix, you automatically qualify for maximum points on this question. If you're not using a Pollinator-Smart seed mix, you can determine the flowering season for native species by using the Virginia Solar Site Native Plant Finder. Note that some species will flower across multiple seasons, and that can be counted towards each season. The third section deals with vegetation metrics in the screening zone. Question 6. Within the screening zone, percent to be planted with solar native plant finder species. Your seed mix can be counted towards this question if the top 3 dominant species in the seed mix and the majority of the species within the seed mix can be found on the Solar Site Native Plant Finder. Although ideal, not every seed mix will contain only native species. As with question 1, we recognize that the panel zone and the screening zone may have more site constraints than the open area. Because of that, we've designed these questions to be a little bit more flexible to work with all types of scenarios. As long as your mix meets the above requirement, divide the acreage to be planted within the screening zone by the total acreage of the screening zone, multiplying by 100. Now we move into the next section of the scorecard, which deals with site management metrics. Question 7 is about planning and maintenance practices. It's a check all that apply question. The first 2 options are that the site has an approved vegetation management plan and that monitoring is proposed annually. The vegetation management plan is optional but highly recommended because it does provide all of the attachments you need to submit your scorecard, and it also gives you a blueprint that you can share with all relevant stakeholders regarding your solar facility. You may be wondering how a plan could be approved without being reviewed by the board since nothing's been submitted yet. As long as you follow the guidelines in the comprehensive manual, you can assume that your vegetation management plan is approved. The review board will contact you with any questions or comments once the scorecard application is submitted. Vegetation monitoring is required biennially. Annual monitoring is optional. It allows for early identification of potential issues that may prevent recertification, and it provides time to correct any deficiencies. For that reason, it is highly recommended to conduct annual monitoring at your site. Two more options for question 7 are invasive species mapping and control proposed annually, and planned on-site use of insecticide or pre-planting seed / plant insecticide treatment, excluding buildings and electrical boxes. Annual invasive species mapping is optional, but it can help you identify potential problem areas and provide time to treat before the critical recertification years. Invasive species are aggressive, and if left unchecked, they can outcompete pollinator habitat on a site. Therefore, even if you don't opt into this question, it is very important to manage invasive species on your site. The insecticide use option is the first one that we encounter on the scorecard, where points are actually removed if you check it. That is because insecticide use is counterproductive to the goal of the program, and we absolutely need to discourage it being used for almost no reason. However, you will see the parentheses at the end that say excluding buildings and electrical boxes. That's because the safety of those on site is critical. Insecticide might need to be used on critical infrastructure to ensure that everybody makes it home safe. Also, a part of site management metrics is invasive species risk. Question 8 is another check all that apply question. Like the insecticide option in question 7, these options actually remove points from your overall score. The first one we'll discuss is the combined cover of tall fescue across all 3 zones planned to be greater than 10%. Tall fescue is a common non-native forage and erosion and sediment control species. It's considered invasive in Virginia, and it's allelopathic, which means that it prevents the growth of other species. For these reasons, tall fescue is counterproductive to the goals of our program. If you are planning on planting it in your non-pollinator areas, divide the area that you'll be installing tall fescue on by the total area of the site and multiply by 100. If for some reason tall fescue is already existing on site and you're not planning on removing that vegetation during construction, then refer to the vegetation assessment section of the site suitability chapter to determine your overall percent cover. If the overall cover for either of these scenarios is greater than 10%, check the option. The second option for question 8 is combined cover of species on the Department of Natural Heritage Virginia invasive plant species list across all 3 zones planned to be greater than 10%. For this question, you'll need to refer to the Virginia Natural Heritage Virginia invasive species list. If any of the plants on this list are planning to be planted in non-pollinator areas, then divide the area to be planted by the total area of the site and multiply it by 100. If any invasive species on this list are present on site already and vegetation will not be removed during construction, refer to the vegetation assessment section of the site suitability chapter in the comprehensive manual to determine the overall percent cover. If in either of these scenarios the coverage turns out to be greater than 10%, then check this option. This section deals with public engagement and research. Question 9 is a check all that apply question. The first option is 2 or more legible and accessible signs identifying pollinator and bird habitat proposed on site, and accessible bench and educational display proposed on site. The content and design of signage and displays are up to the applicant. Provide a sample of the signage in the scorecard application. Sometimes signage, benches, and displays are not feasible for solar sites, particularly at the utility scale where it may be unsafe for the public to visit. Another option for question 9 is research collaboration with college, university, school, or research institute. Collaborations are a great way to document the effects of pollinator habitat on your site. This question is deliberately broad in order to accommodate for any type of research, from the college level all the way to the elementary level. All you need to do is provide contact information of the lead researcher and a general outline of the proposed concepts and methods. The final question deals with pollinator and bird nesting habitat on site. The options for question 10 are existing bare ground patches 1 square foot or larger with undisturbed and well-drained soil. Preserved upland forested communities or forest edge habitat that includes native flowering shrubs and young trees. Cavity nesting sites. Created bee-bird nesting habitat features, and preserved wetland communities in the presence of clean water sources. This question is intended to incentivize preserving existing habitat. It can only be applied to areas within control of the facility. That is, properties that are adjacent to the site cannot be assessed if they aren't owned by the owner and operator of the facility. An initial site visit is needed to determine whether these features are present on site. In order to do that, see the Site Suitability Analysis section of the Comprehensive Manual. Existing bare ground patches provide habitat for native solitary nesting bees. Look for uncompacted sandy or loamy soils to answer this question. If you find areas like this on site, photo document them for submission. Upland forests should have a predominance of native species. The species don't need to be flowering at the time of observation. Just make sure that they are native. Examples are rhus, rubus, ilex, and viburnum species. Cavity nesting sites include snags, dead trees, logs, and pithy stem plants. These must be natural to count. That is, adding logs to your site counts towards the created features category. Speaking of the created bee-bird nesting habitat features category, you can provide up to 50 such features in order to get a maximum of 10 points on your scorecard. There are a wide variety of features that can be used, but beehives do not count since they support the European honeybee, and this program is geared towards supporting native pollinator species. The preserved wetland communities and presence of clean water sources question is related to natural wetland features that are present on site. That is, BMPs do not count towards this question. Water quality is assessed qualitatively. Look for signs like algal blooms, oil sheens, and excessive trash. Wetlands need to be within control of the facility. That is, adjacent sites cannot be assessed if they aren't owned by the solar owner and operator. How to complete Scorecard B. Scorecard B is very similar to Scorecard A, with the wording being just slightly changed to reflect the transition from the conceptual baseline of the site to what is actually existing on site. Questions are again roughly split into 2 categories, vegetation and site management metrics. Both will be evaluated during biennial monitoring events. See the monitoring plan section of the Comprehensive Manual for more details relating to that. Appendix C of the monitoring plan provides an example of how to organize your data from vegetation monitoring in order to best answer these scorecard questions. We suggest that you have the scorecard and Appendix C of the monitoring plan in front of you during this section of the module. You may also want to have the Virginia Solar Site Native Plant Finder open, since it determines which species are native to this program. For each question, I will provide some background into why it's being asked, and I will explain how to evaluate each question. The first section of the scorecard deals with vegetation metrics within the panel zone. Question 1 states, percent of overall existing cover in the panel zone vegetated with solar site native plant finder species. Sum the total percent cover of native species from each sampling plot within the panel zone and divide by the total cover of all species in all plots within the panel zone and multiply by 100. Native species are determined by using the Virginia Solar Site Native Plant Finder. Plots will not always contain 100% native species, so make sure to only take the cover of native species into account for this question. Question 2. Native grass diversity in panel zone. Again, this encourages functional diversity by focusing both on flowering species that provide food sources for pollinators and grass species that can provide habitat for pollinators. The Virginia Solar Site Native Plant Finder indicates which species are grass under the plant type field. Sum the total number of native grasses observed within the panel zone sampling plots. The next section deals with vegetation metrics for the open area. Question 3 states, percent of overall existing cover within the open area vegetated with solar site native plant finder species used by pollinators. The Solar Site Native Plant Finder not only defines what's native to the program, but it also provides a way for you to filter by pollinator. By doing that, you will receive results specific to the used by pollinators wording in this question. Not every sampling plot will have 100% cover of native species, and not every native species will be used by pollinators. This question is particularly geared to flowering plants that would provide food sources for these species. Sum the total percent cover of native species used by pollinators across all plots in the open area and divide by the total cover of all species in all plots in the open area, multiplying by 100. Question 4. Total number of solar site native plant finder species found within the open area. Sum the number of unique native species identified within the open area across all plots. There will be species overlap between plots. Only count the number of unique species. Question 5. Within the open area, seasons with at least 3 solar site native plant finder species in flower. This is a check all that apply question. Species do not need to be observed in flower to count towards this question, because you can determine the flowering season for your native species by using the Virginia Solar Site Native Plant Finder. Some species will flower across multiple seasons, and they can be counted towards each season that they flower in. Overall, just sum the total number of species in each time period to get your answer. The next section deals with vegetation metrics within the screening zone. Question 6 addresses the percent of overall existing cover in the screening zone vegetation with solar native plant finder species. Sum the total percent cover of native species from each sampling plot within the screening zone and divide by the total cover of all species in all plots within the screening zone. Multiply by 100. Not every sampling plot will contain 100% native species, so remember to use the Solar Site Native Plant Finder to determine which ones go into that total cover metric. We are now moving into site management metrics. Question 7 deals with planning and maintenance practices. It is a check all that apply question. The site has an approved vegetation management plan, and vegetation monitoring is conducted annually. Again, the vegetation management plan is optional but highly recommended. If your plan was approved with Scorecard A, continue to submit the same plan and check your option. If there are updates to the plan based on integrated vegetation management practices, inform the review board and submit the new plan. If you did not submit a vegetation management plan alongside Scorecard A, but you wish to now, as long as you follow the guidelines of the comprehensive manual, you can assume that the plan is approved. The review board will reach out to you with any questions. Vegetation monitoring is required biennially. However, if the site was monitored annually, provide the monitoring report as part of the submittal. Other options for question 7 include invasive species mapping and control conducted annually, and on-site use of insecticide, excluding buildings and electrical boxes. If annual invasive species mapping was conducted, provide a plan of the site that shows the location of dominant zones of invasive species with the total area provided of invasive cover in acres. Provide a map from the odd year and one from the even year, and provide evidence of invasive species control through activity logs or before and after photos. For the insecticide use option, remember that insecticide use is counterproductive to the goal of the program, and selecting this option will result in removal of points from your overall score. However, there is a caveat of excluding buildings and electrical boxes. The safety of your employees and those on site is critical. Insecticide might need to be used on critical infrastructure in order to make sure that everyone comes home safely. Question 8 assesses invasive species risk. It is a check all that apply question. The first option is combined cover of tall fescue across all 3 zones greater than 10%. Combine the total percent cover of tall fescue in all sampling plots across the site and divide by the total cover of all the species in all plots across the entire site and multiply by 100. If your cover turns out to be greater than 10%, select this option. The second option deals with the combined cover of species on the Department of Natural Heritage's Virginia Invasive Plant Species List across all 3 zones greater than 10%. You will need the Natural Heritage Virginia Invasive Plant Species List in order to complete this question. Identify which, if any, of the species in your monitoring plots are considered invasive per this list. If so, sum the total percent cover of all invasive species across all plots and divide by the total cover of all species in all plots, multiplying by 100. If you result in greater than 10% cover, then select this option. Site management metrics also deal with public engagement and research. The following options for question 9 are 2 or more legible and accessible signs identifying pollinator and bird habitat present on site, accessible bench and educational display present on site, and research collaboration with college, university, school, or research institute. The content and design of signage and displays are up to the applicant. Provide a photo or a sample of the signage in the scorecard application. Again, sometimes signage, benches, and displays are not feasible for solar sites, particularly those at the utility scale where it may not be safe for the public to visit. Research collaborations are a great way to document the effects of pollinator habitat on your site. This question is again deliberately broad to accommodate for any type of research. Just provide the contact information of the lead researcher and a general outline of the proposed concepts and methods. The final question deals with pollinator and bird nesting habitat on site. This is a check all that apply question. The options are existing bare ground patches 1 square foot or larger with undisturbed and well-drained soil. Preserved upland forested communities or forest edge habitat that includes native flowering shrubs and young trees. Cavity nesting sites. created bee bird nesting habitat features, preserved wetland communities, and the presence of clean water sources. This question is again intended to incentivize preserving existing habitat and can only be applied to areas within control of the facility. Confirm that these features still exist by photo documenting them during biennial monitoring. Bare ground patches provide habitat for solitary nesting bees. Look for uncompacted sandy or loamy soils. If located, photo document these potential areas to provide in your scorecard submittal. Upland forests should have a predominance of native species. Species do not need to be in flower at the time of observation to count towards this question. Examples of native species that may dominate a forest edge are rhus, rubus, ilex, and viburnum species. Cavity nesting sites are snags, dead trees, logs, and pithy-stemmed plants. They must be present naturally to count towards this option. Adding logs counts towards the created features category. The created features category can provide up to 50 bee and bird nesting habitat features, of which you can use a wide variety. Beehives, however, do not count, since they provide habitat for the European honeybee, and this program is focused on native pollinator species. If these are added to your site, provide photo documentation in the scorecard submittal. Natural wetland features that are present on site should be photo documented to be submitted along with the scorecard. BMPs do not count towards this option. Water quality is assessed qualitatively, so look for signs like algal blooms, oil sheens, and excessive trash. The wetlands also need to be within control of the facility in order to count towards this option. Revisiting the goals and objectives of this module, you should have learned what the scorecards are and how they were created. You should understand the scorecard approval process, and you should have learned how to complete Scorecard A and Scorecard B. If you have questions related to this training module, feel free to reach out to us at the pollinator.smart@dcr.virginia.gov email address. We'll see you in the next module.